De Balie staat voor mij voor zelfontwikkeling.
De Balie staat voor mij voor het vrije woord.
Voor het gesprek. De randjes opzoeken.
A combination of ultimate freedom of speech.
En waar niets taboe is of zou moeten zijn.
Een plek vol creativiteit.
Waar beeldende kunst, literatuur en nog veel meer disciplines samengaan.
Een plek vol kansen.
Een goed gesprek is een gevaarlijk gesprek. Het moet eng zijn, het moet iets op het spel staan.
Maar toch elkaar proberen te begrijpen.
And it may make you think before you answer.
Want met je vrienden ben je het altijd eens, maar hier leer je nog eens wat.
Discussie moet je niet onder een draadje doen op Instagram. Dat is niet de plek. Hier is de plek.
Het was mijn eerste plek waar ik documentaire leerde kennen en andere media ook leerde kennen.
Hier, deze plek. Daar zat Adelheid Rozen.
En er zaten een stuk of 10 regisseurs in Burger in de zaal.
Daar heb ik haar voor het eerst ontmoet.
En een van die regisseurs had gezegd, voor je begint moet je aan het publiek zeggen, als u overgaat tot geweld wordt u gearresteerd. En ik was nog nooit zo'n keurige bijeenkomst.
En it changed my life.
There's only one place like that, and it's the Balie.
Het maakte de avond merkwaardig. Op zo'n manier dat ik die niet snel vergeten ben.
Yes, good evening everyone. Welcome in this fully packed Balie to this program about the threat of hybrid war, organized by my Balie colleague Rogaya Sek together with the investigative desk. And my name is Zara Toxis. I'm program editor at the Balie and I will moderate this evening. And tonight we are discussing Russia's hybrid war, because the second invasion of Russia and Ukraine and also the upcoming European elections are triggering new attempts by the Kremlin to meddle in our national affairs through espionage, fake news, and bribing politicians and journalists. But what is hybrid war? How does it work? How does it affect the Netherlands? And how do we protect ourselves against it? We will discuss this with our guests tonight. And I have to announce that, unfortunately, Frans Timmermans cannot join because he has to be at the parliament because of votings. But we have great other guests, don't worry, and which brings me to the first guest tonight. What I can say is that hybrid warfare does not only target supply chains, critical infrastructure and strategic materials, but also an institution like the Balie. And that's why I want to start with inviting our director, Juri Albrecht, to tell us a bit more about this impact on our institution. So please give him a warm welcome, Juri Albrecht.
Thank you, Zara. And thank you, Rogaya, for asking me to tell a little bit about the Balie. Dear friends, dear guests, dear speakers, a warm welcome to all of you. The topic of this evening, Russia's hybrid war, could be partly interpreted as Russia's propaganda war or info war. And it's a topic which is very close to our hearts here at the Balie. And alas, not only to our hearts, but also to our minds. It's a very worrying topic. It's something which might even keep us awake at night. And it's indeed both a geopolitical problem and a very personal problem. I want to share a few observations with you from the past years here in the Balie, also because Russia's hybrid war is something, to say it with the words of our national philosopher Johan Cruijff, dat je pas gaat zien als je het doorhebt, which you only see once you notice it. Because it's done very subtle, very cunning. It's not about open and obvious pro-Putin propaganda. It's about undermining our institutions and narratives. It's about sowing doubt. Doubt is enough for the Russian war effort, enough for the Russian security services, and enough for Putin. Over the past 10 years, in the wake of the Russian occupation of the Crimea and the Donbass, we have organized many evenings, programs and lectures about Belarus, Ukraine and Russia. Firstly, nobody came, but slowly more people came. We hosted Belarusian opposition leaders like Andrei Sannikov and presidential candidates Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and Sannikov. We organized together with an art center in Kiev debates in Ukraine. And here in Amsterdam, we invited the daughter of the murdered Russian opposition leader Boris Nemtsov, the members of punk group Pussy Riot, and many, many, many others. We first started noticing something of Russian activity around the many public debates we organized about the National Advisory Referendum on the approval of the Ukraine-European Union Association Agreement, which was held in the Netherlands on 6 April 2016. The referendum question was, are you for or against the approval act of the association agreement between the European Union and Ukraine? We got approached by very persistent staff members of Russia Today, who offered to speak at the Balie without need for speaker's fee. Well, that's an opportunity, we thought. They could also provide speakers from the Donbass so that we could hear the people from Ukraine speak for themselves. So, but with a bit of a fact-checking, we found out, easily out actually, that the offered speakers from the breakaway Ukrainian Republic were born in Moscow and not in the Donbass. So we turned the offer politely down. And around that time, I started noticing that my Twitter account was flooded by trolls. I tried to block the tsunami of hundreds and hundreds of followers per day for weeks on end. I didn't succeed. Thousands. And around that time, the online abuse started to become really, really irritating. First in English, later also in Dutch. I think those machine and those troll farms learn as well. End of 2019, we started to host here at the Balie in deep secrecy, because of security reasons, the offices of investigative journalist group Bellingcat. I got involved in them as a member of their supervisory board. And Bellingcat had to leave London because of the many slaps filed against them in the London courts by Russian proxies and with Russian money. Much money, actually. Slaps? Slaps? Slaps, according to Wikipedia, are strategic lawsuits against public participation, known as slaps, suits, or intimidation lawsuits, or strategic litigation against public participation. They are lawsuits intended to censor, intimidate and silence critics by burdening them with the cost of legal defense until they abandon their criticism or opposition. Very effective and very much practiced in London against organizations such as Bellingcat. One of the people involved in these slaps was Dutch former journalist Erik van der Beek. Remember that name. Erik van der Beek actively involved here in Amsterdam with Bonanza Media and the Andere Krant, also often in Moscow. But most probably, both of those, the Andere Krant, are both most probably financed and advised by the Russian security services, and that's well documented by Bellingcat and published on their website. You can still read it today. Bellingcat was in court mainly under attack because of the reporting of the MH17, of course. The MH17 case, and Bellingcat proved, beyond reasonable doubt, that it were the Russians in the Donbass that killed the 298 people on board of that plane. Among them, a member of our supervisory board and her 3 young daughters, and 2 colleagues from behind the bar here in the Balie on their way to the island of Balie. Slowly, we started noticing an increase of activity on our servers and firewalls. But when we hosted evenings with Christo Gozef, the lead investigator of Bellingcat, we just saw him at the short movie we saw, who had started to work on his documentary with, which later won an Oscar, on a documentary with Alexei Navalny on Putin's special secret service unit, which is responsible for killing Putin's enemies. Be it at home in Russia or abroad. And then it became a real bombardment. Which the bombardment is still going on today, every day. Our servers and sites are 24/7 under heavy attack. I first realized how really difficult and important that bombardment had become when Iranian human rights activist Masi Alinejad spoke here, and our servers were first unable to broadcast the program on internet. We had to move to our backup server to get the signal out. And later that night, when I took her to the late-night television talk show Op 1, suddenly the sound at the live studio was without any explanation off. We had to start the conversation again. That was the second time that evening that there was a disruption. The TV host assured us that that had never happened before. In 2022, we moved Bellingcat out of the Balie because according to the international security community, it had become too dangerous to stay on our third floor here in the Balie. Christo Grozev is now permanently at the other side of the Atlantic Ocean in the US, and he's advised because of his security, his safety, not to come to the Netherlands. A far cry from the weeks and months that he sat here in our cafe working behind his laptop. We continued to organize events here in the Balie on Central and Eastern Europe, and after the all-out Russian war against Ukraine in February 22, we doubled our efforts. May last year, we had placed a destroyed Russian tank at the Leidseplein. We imported it from Ukraine. It was destroyed in the village of Bucha, not far from Kiev. We call it an artistic intervention to start a conversation on the brutal reality of war in Europe. An introduction for 4 days programming on Europe here in the Balie. The tank was opened with a marvelous speech, I have to say, by our mayor Femke Halsema. To our distress, there was no police inside that morning when she spoke about democracy and about the necessity of defending democracy. But others, yes, others were there. A mixed group of very, very aggressive demonstrators actively cheered on by Erik van der Beek. He directed the group, gave them instructions. He made a Hitler salute to Halsema. An example followed suit by his ragtag followers. Insults were hollered at the mayor. I heard screams of traitor, and some people yelled that they should shave her head bald because he was a traitor and a whore. Among the crowd, I recognized several very vocal and outraged editors of the Andere Krant. Halsema stayed very calm, but this enraged the crowd even more, and they became very threatening. Together with her chauffeur and several of the female staff of the Balie, we barely managed to get her safely into her car. I give you these examples from our own experience. Our experience with disinformation disruption here at the Balie, also because we think that it is important to keep Amsterdam a safe place for the many exiled artists, journalists, critical thinkers, and voices from Russia, Belarus, Iran, Ukraine, and many other places in the world where democratic-minded citizens are under attack and threatened with their lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yuri, for sharing this. And I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Peter Racing, and he's the new head of the MIVD, the Dutch Military Intelligence Service. And previously he was the director of the operation at the Department of Defense. Peter Racing, please.
Thank you. And Yuri, I can almost leave it at this. I mean, your example was pivotous. Well, good evening all, and thanks for the opportunity to have me here. Hybrid warfare is also known as operations in the grey zone, or operations below the threshold of Article 5. It is the circumstance of not being at war and, most of the time, trying to keep it that way. It's normally not a situation with a lot of kinetic action, as we call it in the military. No bombardments or heavy weapon fires will be heard. But with the growing influence of the digital world, it is increasingly becoming a strategic tool in order to achieve a greater goal or start an actual war. The perfect example, although perfect is a little bit out of context here, is the gradual takeover of Crimea by the Russian Federation in 2014, almost exactly 10 years ago. It is an example of an orchestrated execution of a master plan to introduce ambiguity disputable attribution, and psychological warfare in order to gain control over territory that is not yours. And this is, in this case, supported by a minority of like-minded people. Therefore, the present anxious posture in the Baltic states is fully understandable. Hybrid warfare usually poses a threat or is directed at infrastructure. It was already mentioned: digital, electrical, physical. It also relates to the gaining of economic interest, the seizing of scientific knowledge, and to the fueling of social and political unrest. And increasingly, the cyber domain becomes important and the area in which the fight actually takes place. Zooming in on the Russian Federation, I would like to start with a few general comments. First of all, the Russian security paradigm is different from the Western security paradigm. Although the Russian decision-making process is rational, it is based on a fundamentally different system of values and norms. The Russian threat must be understood from that perspective. The Russian threat perception comes from a permanent sense of being surrounded by enemies and being strategically vulnerable. This is not new and started a few centuries ago. However, it has grown a lot the past decades as a result of their declining geopolitical influence. From a Russian perspective, Western and Russian security interests are conflicting and incompatible. For Russia, this war with Ukraine has an existential character. So, the context for Russia is fundamentally different. The war with Ukraine can be seen on three different levels. First, there's the direct war between Russian Federation and Ukraine. This is the most visible one. Second is the war between the Russian Federation and the Western states. This is the regional and the most fundamental one. Third is the war between autocracy and democracy. It is a discussion with regard to the democratic values, with the international rules-based order, and the strive for new principles. Causes and consequences on the different levels influence each other. You could argue that hybrid warfare is the first stage on the path towards the actual declaration of war. And if that does not happen, it will increasingly become a very important phase with impact on all three levels of this war. Hybrid warfare plays an important role in the support of achieving goals and supports the shaping of a future battlefield or conflict. In order for Russia to accomplish its historic goals with regard to Ukraine, that is to get rid of the Nazis, that is the demilitarization of Ukraine, and it's the forming of a neutral state, which then can function as a buffer state. So in order to accomplish that, it will use every tool, including hybrid warfare. Let me give you a few examples of activities performed by the Russian Federation aimed at the Netherlands that underline my previous statements and were executed more or less in this grey zone. First, employees of the Russian Military Intelligence Service, the GRU, have hacked routers of unaware Dutch citizens and of small Dutch companies. By using those routers, they managed to execute cyber operations which were aimed against Dutch interests or interests of allies. And we managed to warn the owners of the infected routers. Another example, in cooperation with my colleagues of the AIVD and colleagues from abroad, we disturbed a cyber operation which was aimed at the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW. 4 Russian intelligence officers were caught while setting up specialized equipment outside of the OPCW building in order to hack their system. The probable cause for this activity was the OPCW investigation into the use of chemical weapons in Syria and the suspicious poisoning of Sergei Skripal. all the disinformation which was disseminated by the Russian intelligence community with regard to the crash of MH17. This was a clear attempt to influence public opinion and hamper our proper investigation. Russian entities map our underwater sea infrastructure and act suspiciously, to say the least. This subject was not at the top of our minds until a few years ago. It has a relevance towards internet cables, gas pipes, supply of drinking water, and energy supply. Sabotage of these entities can severely hamper our energy supply and our economy. I recently got a Russian sea chart of the approaches of Den Helder. These maps also contain the position of the underwater sea structure and the infrastructure. So there's no doubt in my mind that the Russians are accurate. And that was a coincidence. Russian intelligence uses all kinds of cover companies in order to evade the current sanctions coming from the international community. They are still quite depending on technical parts from the West for the assemblance of their own products in Russia. So Russian companies work closely with the Russian intelligence services. Covers are also being used by Russian intelligence officers working abroad. Although it's becoming harder for them, they are still able to access valuable information or plug disinformation. There was a campaign being set up by two groups of Russian hackers in an attempt to spread disinformation with regard to the NATO summit in Vilnius. They used fake social media accounts and fake intelligence reports, which were supposed to originate from the Lithuanian government. This was detected, luckily, early and was spread out. And finally, not everything we do or what we see can be attributed. There's been a cyber attack, for example, aimed at International Criminal Court last September. We managed to interfere. However, it's still unknown who the actor was. These examples are the ones I can talk about. Unfortunately, there's a lot more which I'm unable to do so. And it doesn't stop with Russia. Best thing that can happen to us, stop being naive. It is happening out there, and usually it is not innocent. We were almost getting used to a prosperous country being the Netherlands with no potential threat around us. And in a lot of ways, that makes sense. However, if the hybrid warfare initiatives by the Russian Federation and the actual war in Ukraine taught us one thing, then it should be that we will be targeted. And this should be part of the general awareness of every citizen, including, by the way, myself. I know now how easy your mind or how easy it is to be manipulated by your telephone for whatever subversive activities. We need to be more resilient. Furthermore, in certain ways, autocratic regimes have an advantage. Their lines of decision-making are short, and big decisions don't require big discussions in parliament or in government, for instance. Let me reassure you, there's a fundamentally good reason for us to be organized as we are. It's one of the reasons I joined the armed forces. We need to protect it. My tasks and assignments also come from the top. It is the government, it's the parliamentary top, as a result of a broad and wide discussion with regard to the situation in the world and the situation in the Netherlands. I wouldn't want this any other way. And my activities are surrounded by a system of checks and balances, including oversight boards. That is how it should be in a democracy. At the same time, there's still more than enough ways for us to act and to get things done. A few perspectives to conclude. As intelligence services, we can play a major role in the phase just before the actual espionage and sabotage take place. We focus our energy towards early detection, early assessment, and if needed, early action. We also would like to find out who did it. Attribution can scare off and thus decrease the threat level. In order to be effective, you must be able to use at least similar tools and means as your opponent. In the cyber domain, this was a challenge, but we made a big step last week with the temporary law, which is now being implemented. This law passed Parliament and gives us more maneuver space against countries with an offensive cyber program aimed at the Netherlands. Our ability to act, especially on the cable, has grown. This is a necessity because we were merely blind. And the temporary law still requires enough assurances with regard to privacy and oversight. In the cyber domain, we can further improve in cooperation and information sharing. This is not only applicable between the intelligence services, but also between my service and relevant civilian companies. We already took the first steps and will continue to do so. This can also raise the awareness of own responsibilities. The owners of North Sea infrastructure, for instance, are usually not state-owned companies. And as a minimum, we should find a system to share and to warn. Finally, I already mentioned it a few times. Awareness is rising, but still needs little work. Russia takes an interest in our critical infrastructure. This is real. This is happening every day. Sometimes we know, but this can also remain hidden, especially in the digital domain. We need to be as effective as possible in that area. Awareness also goes with regard to sharing information, internally between departments, with companies, and with colleagues abroad. Hybrid warfare activities in the grey zone is tooling which is used by Russia because for them it's easy, effective, and it causes ambiguity. Their opponent needs to act while Russia keeps dominance with regard to escalation. It causes discussion as well between allies. And for Russia, that is more than enough. They don't have to win over NATO in a military sense. For them, it is enough to divide the partnership. For all of us, this means awareness. Russia has a time. We should not feel rushed, but keep together. Thank you.
Please join me here at the table. And thanks a lot for your talk. Just to clarify some things, did the MIVD also see a higher frequency and intensity of Russian attacks after the second invasion of Ukraine?
Good question. The answer is yes. So it was part of their, let me say, offensive. And it was, in the first stages, it was aimed at Ukraine itself, more or less. But the further we go down in time, it spreads out towards the countries which lie next to Ukraine and which are part of the West, more or less.
And you also mentioned a tactic of Russian intelligence services setting up fake companies to buy materials who are needed for the war. Can you say something about the scale of this?
Russia is interested in our support to Ukraine. That's number one, and also in technology. And the scale is huge.
What means huge?
Yeah,
hundreds, thousands.
As a director of an intelligence service, that's a little bit hard to talk about.
Yes.
To be very honest, but we have a few companies in the Netherlands, and everybody can name a few, I guess, when you think about it, which are targeted basically every day. I can mention ASML, for instance. That's a typical company which is under cyber attack basically every day. So they need to have their defense up in order.
Yeah. And you also mentioned the Russians monitoring our waters. And I saw this research from Dutch journalists from Pointer. and they also talked with the Dutch Coast Guard and the Dutch Marines, and they actually said that they were under-equipped to do enough research and maybe take early action, as you said, is needed.
Yeah.
This sounds very worrying.
Yeah.
That they don't have this equipment or maybe this mandate.
No, but it's for us. It's been a sort of wake-up call as well.
For us, like for the MIVD?
For the MIVD, it's more or less. It's not a MIVD question. I guess it's more a military question for the Netherlands, because once we were a little bit more awake, we managed to organize it a little bit better. So I'm very confident that there's not...
What do you mean with once we were more awake?
Well, we needed to have a wake-up call. So we backtracked the track of Russian vessels, which were supposedly involved in subversive activities. And once we find out that they were actually mapping our systems, mapping our underwater structure, that was the wake-up call. So from that moment on, every Russian vessel is being shadowed when it's in our waters. And it's not something we can do by ourselves solely, so that's an international effort. So all the countries which are part of the North Sea infrastructure, they participate in that shadowing system.
I also heard our Minister of Defense, Kasia Ollongren, saying last summer we need to protect our cables, our windmills and our pipelines better. Did this happen, do you think, after last summer?
You mean that we protected better?
Yes.
Well, we at least do surveillance a little bit better. So we monitor the North Sea much better than we did, let's say, 3 years ago. And in that way, it's better. Yes. Can we do more? And can we do more from, let's say, from the moment that we start to build the windmills and lay the pipelines? I think we do. And
because it starts there.
It starts there. So it starts with the manufacturers. If I compare us to, let's say, Norway is a little bit further down the road. So they have all kinds of systems within the pipelines. And it's something we are doing now as well.
And when I listen to your talk, and actually also to Yuri's talk, I hear a lot of urgency. And I'm also searching, like, what is needed specifically? Because if I hear Kasia Ollongren saying we need to protect this better, okay, I hear you saying we need to start with the infrastructure. But right now, what would you need as the MIVD to do this research better? Is it money or maybe certain laws, or you started saying with cooperation? Like, what has priority, do you think?
Priority, I think, is general awareness. That helps a lot. And for me, I was quite naive as well before I got into this job, to be very honest. And it starts with stupid things like changing your password every now and then. And not after 3 months, but maybe even every 2 weeks or so. But it's cooperation, it's making sure that we inform and share information at the right levels with the right companies. That's probably the first step, awareness.
Yes, because you also ended your talk with stop being naive.
Yeah.
And as an ordinary citizen, I think this is very urgent, but also what should I do with this information? I can change my passport, but this doesn't protect a pipeline.
No, but it's a general awareness that if you are somewhere, then if you go abroad, if you go to countries nearby Russia, you should consider not taking your own telephone, that kind of things. It's the awareness that something can happen to you.
Is there something you would need from politics which would make your work better, give you more equipment to do research?
Not for now. I think we're. I mentioned a few remarks on the temporary law. That gives us a little bit more maneuver space to be able to basically survey the cable on subsurface activities. And that's enough for now.
But if Timmermans would be here, you wouldn't ask him
He knows.
Okay, he knows already.
He knows.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think he was in favor. By the way, he himself was in favor, but we cannot ask him, so we'll have to wait. Yeah.
Yes. Also, we're in a process of a new government, a new formation. So, how do you look at this process and the outcome?
I'm very anxious to find out who the new prime minister and the new minister of defense will be, but they will step into a difficult task. And for me, it's going to be a new minister. That's it. I mean, that's a very political question, but I'm responsible for military intelligence and security, and that's it. So it's not a matter of not caring, but it's just the way it is.
Another very easy question. There are also several Putin-admiring politicians in the Netherlands, including the leader of our biggest party, PVV, Geert Wilders. Did you, as the MIVD, also do research in financial flows from the Kremlin to certain parties in the Netherlands?
No, not from the MIVD. No. No, you should. We can ask the question to my colleague from the AIVD, maybe, but not from the MIVD. No.
Okay, there's not a lot of cooperation.
It's a very easy question. Yeah.
Okay. Let me see if I still have time. Yeah. Also, after the Dutch elections of 2023 in November, we saw a change in the Russian ambassador. So we had this. We could say controversial Russian ambassador to the Netherlands, and after the election, he was immediately exchanged with a somewhat more, let's say, moderate person. What do you think? Do you think this is like a very strategic choice or just coincidence?
To be honest, I don't know, because I don't talk to this ambassador. To be very honest, but I mentioned something with regard to. Intelligence officers which did some subversive activities near the OPCW building. Russia uses intelligence officers under a sort of cover of diplomacy. For them, that's more difficult. So in that respect, they decreased their activities quite a bit due to the sanctions. And it might be in relation to the sanctions. I don't know, but... I don't think there's a big relation with the ambassador in the posting, to be honest. No.
When I make these kind of programs, there are always people asking, but the Dutch Secret Service is also making use of espionage tactics and some kind of hybrid warfare. So how would you describe the difference?
I cannot talk about it, no.
You already know, okay. Can you maybe... only elaborate on what makes Russian hybrid warfare different than how the Dutch secret intelligence service works?
I guess it's the effect you want to achieve. So for us, it is most of the time. It's almost most of the time. It's defensive from nature, and from the Russian perspective, it's almost offensive from nature. So we try to make sure that we are defended, and to defend properly, you need sometimes to be a little bit offensive as well. So there's probably a little connection there, but at the same time, I have oversight boards who check my movements. From the first moment, I have a plan, and during the operation itself. And that's different from a Russian perspective. So there's much more leeway for Russian hackers to act than for us. So there's a difference. But as I try to explain in my speech, there's no thought in my mind that this system of ours is less or bad. No, it's the way it is, and it's the way it's supposed to be.
Thank you very much.
You're
and
welcome.
We might come back to you in the end of the evening during the Q&A.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's time for our third speaker already. I want to welcome Pekka Kallioiniemi, all the way from Finland. Please give him a warm welcome. And Pekka is a Finnish researcher of disinformation hybrid warfare, and he publishes the popular Vatnik Soup series on X, former Twitter, where he exposes the strategies of Russian propagandists. And he has a book upcoming called Vatnik Soup, The Ultimate Guide to Russian Disinformation. And we're going to listen to a short presentation. Thank you.
All right. It's good to be here. I think I should have, there they are. So, so the topic of my speech today, disinformation and propaganda on social media. I will heavily focus, or solely focus on Russian version of this for reasons that I explain soon. But first, let's take a briefly look at the terminology. So what are information operations? Organized activity where one party attempts to affect the public opinion and behavior of individuals and policymakers, which then affect the society or a community as a whole. That's basically, it comes from academia, it's very official, but it's basically, if you think of disinformation campaign, it's a smaller thing, but information operations it's much bigger. It can span over decades, and it has a very long-term goals, and would be 25 years of information operations to actually have an effect. And effective information operations, they have a polarizing effect on the society or a community. I will elaborate on this in a bit. And as I said, they are long-term activities, so there are no, it's not like a quick brainwashing procedure that you do, but you see the effects years after the initiation of the actual operation. And today, a lot of these operations rely heavily on the internet and especially on social media. So this is probably the biggest channel where they are being conducted right now. And then briefly about disinformation, because we often talk about disinformation, misinformation. You sometimes see these being used in the same context. So what is in academic terms, it's intentionally misleading information. So you know that the message that you are spreading or telling, it's bullshit, but you still share it. So just an example here, it's often like a half-truth, and then you combine it with a lie. So this is, so there are biolabs in Ukraine. Some of you may remember this from the first days of the full-scale war in February 2022. And then TASS reported that the Ukrainians are actually developing weapons with support from the US in these biolabs, and then they became these bioweapons labs. And this narrative was also spread, people like Tucker Carlson, for example, in the United States. And then you can even take it further. You can say that these weapons include combat insects that allegedly will be used to infect Russian troops with hazardous contagious diseases. So, for example, there was a story in Russia that Ukrainians are creating a bioweapon that will affect pregnant Russian women so that they miscarry. So this kind of stories, but in Russia they become reality through this. TASS is a very official state Kremlin-controlled media site. So, and they are spreading this kind of narrative. So it's but yeah, that's disinformation. Russians also utilize a strategy that is called the fire hose of falsehood. And this term was coined by a Rund paper from, I think, 2016. But the characteristics of this strategy is it's high volume and multi-channel approach. A lot of messages on all possible platforms. So Facebook, TikTok, Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, every possible social media platform are being used for this. There's no kind of, they're absolutely always willing to tell lies. There is no commitment for consistency. You can kind of conflict. There can be conflicting messages, and it's actually better if they are conflicting each other. And the point is not to persuade or brainwash people, but to confuse and overwhelm, and also entertain. So it's often very entertaining. content. And this kind of strategy, it assumes a low trust environment, and it lowers it further. So in countries where people don't trust politicians, policymakers, the police, journalists, this strategy works extremely well. And this is important in a later stage of my speech. I will get back to this. But in general, number of arguments matter more than their quality because they want to swarm you. They want to drown out any competing message that is coming from like fact-checking or whatever. Is that it's just the volume that you basically use to confuse and polarize and overwhelm people. And about the scope of Russian operations, 61% of foreign influence efforts are conducted by Russia. This is a statistic from 2023. In Europe, this is from 2018, so it's a bit old, but over 80% is coming from Russia. So that's the scale of it. So it's almost impossible to comprehend. You still think of countries like China are also doing a lot of information operations, but still Russia is dominating this information space with their operations. With the 2020 US presidential election, troll farms reached 140 million Americans a month on Facebook, just on Facebook. And it's basically these days the focus is not anymore on Europe or North America, but Africa, for example. There's a lot of information operations going on in various African countries, Latin America. So those are the big hotspots right now, and they're also the blind spots for most. And as I said, one of the main goals is to polarize communities, to kind of turn them to fight each other. And this is often done by provoking conversations around big, controversial topics that invoke strong emotions. COVID-19 vaccines, Black Lives Matter, in the Netherlands, farmer protests. There's a lot of different topics that can be used to polarize societies or communities. And Russians are very good at utilizing this strategy of polarization. Because if you think about it, divided society is always weaker than something that's unified. So they always try to put a wedge between different parties in societies and in countries, so to kind of create this further polarization inside it. And why do they use social media? Social media platforms are integral part of our lives. We find love, we find work, we decide who we vote, we give a lot of power to algorithms and social media sites. And I mean, all these companies, they also have massive amount of information and data on us, so they can make very sophisticated estimates on our emotions, our desires, our dislikes, so they can give us endless amount of content that we will enjoy. We will be fully engaged in these social media websites because they are so good at predicting what we enjoy. And that's also the process that takes us to so-called rabbit holes of, for example, conspiracy theories or radicalization or etc. And in general, social media, it increases our emotions. So these kind of primitive emotional reactions of rage and hate and I mean, strong emotional reactions are very common in social media, but what it lacks is what I call soul. So there is no, for example, here I'm talking to you, we have this nonverbal communication. I can look at people, I can look at you, and we have this soul involved in the communication. But once you go online, it's a bit more colder environment in that sense. So these primitive emotions are dominating our kind of interaction online. Also, it's a very manipulated space. You cannot see the text below, but this is something that you can buy for 10 euros for online. So if you want to become a popular on Instagram, 24,000 likes. I don't know how many of you have Instagram or photos where you have 24,000 likes, but just spend 10 euros and you will have it. And you can buy manipulation on any platform. It's possible, and it's still very much, it's a huge business. And this is, of course, done also on a national level. Like troll farms, bot farms, they are still a reality, and they are very active. And these platforms are basically, they cannot do much about it because it's just such a massive problem. And then when we talk about Russia, whenever there's a big event, be the first one to set the agenda. Russia works like this. They always have the first story. It's always bullshit, but they always have the first story. So here, the left image is after MH17. Russians published a photo, photoshopped image of a Ukrainian fighter jet shooting down MH17. Then they came up with, okay, it was actually filled with corpses. There were no living people in the plane. And I mean, they came up really fast with these stories. Nord Stream, they were the first one to put out the big story probably through Seymour Hersh. There are a lot of evidence suggesting that Seymour Hersh, a journalist, is getting information through a Russian operative. Of course, Mariupol theater bombing. They came up quickly with the story that there was a bomb inside and it was triggered, even though they bombed. If you don't know the story, it says children on the pavement, then a lot of people died and when Russia actually bombed the theater. But yeah, first story always comes from Russia, and it's always bullshit. For the Skripal poisoning, they had, I think, 28 different stories. So it's just to overwhelm you. The truth doesn't matter. It's completely asymmetrical because they can always lie, and we have to rely on fact-checking and investigations. And if you think about how long did it take for the investigation of MH17, it took years, and Russia had already set many, many stories and agendas. So they're always the first one to set the agenda. And then the Netherlands, what's been going on here? If we talk about hybrid warfare, 2013, you had the Russian spy Raymond Poudre jailed here. I think it was 2009 when he was giving out documents to Russians. Of course, political influencing. Geert Wilders already in 2014 was saying that anti-democratic forces, Jew haters and National Socialists are at Maidan when there was the Revolution of Dignity. And legitimizing the Kremlin, going to Russia as an election observer or something like this. It's also a way to kind of, it's a hybrid warfare strategy. Of course, Bonanza Media. Then we already there was a talk about sending sanctioned technology to Russia to fuel their war machine. And then a Russian campaign with 50,000 fake accounts that sent 1 million messages in an attempt to undermine support for Ukraine in Germany. 2024. I mean, there are a lot of these examples. This is just a few, but I mean, they are very active probably today. I don't know if maybe 2 or 3 GRU agents are here, but yeah, probably, yeah. But I mean, hi. Okay, then what's the solution? Okay, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of gloomy stuff. I'm going to talk about Finland. Finnish people are not very good at saying nice things about their country, but I will do it now because we are very good at this. We start teaching media literacy at a very early age, preschool already. So what are the consequences of lying, how it affects communities and so on, and it goes throughout the whole school system. So these media literacy, critical thinking, they are included in the curriculum. We have a very free press. I think it's the most free in the world, number one. They are free to criticize decision-making, politics. There's also, on the national level, there's a multi-channel approach. So, for example, Finnish broadcasting company is very active on social media, also TikTok, all this, all social media platforms, basically. And there's also quite a lot of research on future of disinformation and future of journalism. So how AI will, for example, change, what's happening in our society, how it can lower trust in general, basically, to everything. And the goal is to increase trust in society and to its authorities and decision makers. So as I said before, the firehose of falsehood works in a low trust environment. In Finland, we try to kind of increase this trust so that people actually trust journalists and politicians, and they are held accountable for what they do. And then there's also the matter of security of information. So if there is actual war, how can we make sure that the information that, for example, policymakers are receiving, that it's not influenced by a foreign agent, for example? But yeah, this is a small part of from a Guardian article about how Finland starts fighting fake news. It's quite old, but still, it's a good article if you want to take a look at this. And this is in Finnish, but it basically tells you how people trust. This is the up there in the red box is a Finnish broadcasting company. So basically the biggest relay conveyor of news. So 85% trusted. Yellow press at the bottom with 26 and 30. But still, like in general, there's a high trust to media in Finland. This is, so Finland applied for NATO membership, I think in May 2022, I may be mistaken. This is anti-NATO demonstration. It's 7 people plus the guy who took the photo. And that's basically, we had a lot of big demonstrations for COVID, during COVID time, like over 10,000 people. Then the full-scale invasion started, and now it's this. So there's something changed. People kind of realize that something is going on, and I mean, I'm kind of happy about this picture when I look at it. It's a good picture. But for the future, there's a lot of stuff we have to worry about the future. I hope this video works, but let's.
This is a PSA. You can't believe anything you see these days. These glasses aren't even real. Neither is my face. All this stuff was 3D tracked on using these dots that I drew on with this marker. Actually, the marker isn't real either. Neither is the background, or my face. Have a good night.
So AI will change everything. It's going to be a big game changer. That's another topic. Maybe in a few months we'll do it here in the Balie. But that concludes my presentation. Thank you. And
Thanks a lot, Pekka. I also want to invite Eva Cook here. Please join the table. Here, yes, please, on my right. And Eva is a Russia correspondent for newspaper NRC Handelsblad, and she worked in Moscow until last summer, when the newspaper decided to bring you back because of unsafe working conditions. So, well, good to have you here.
Thank you.
How did you listen to Pekka's presentation?
Well, what can I say? It was a big feast of recognition, because all the stories that you told, all the disinformation narratives I've seen in Russia in my work. I worked there for about 3 years. I traveled a lot in the country. And really, I mean, you go... I remember a discussion I had in Vladivostok with a guy who was convinced that the dead bodies were already on the plane when MH17 was shot down above Ukraine. So they were. He really tried to convince me that the bodies were already put in the plane. I remember a story from an older lady. It's mainly older people who are very susceptible to it. An older lady who was completely convinced about the biolabs in Ukraine. And she knew that these labs were evaporating some sort of smoke, and this smoke was messing with Ukrainian brains, and that's why they have a president who is a drug addict and a Nazi. And as a journalist, it's very, I mean, the best word I use for it, it's German, it's unheimisch, it's very creepy. But also it poses a dilemma, because how are you going to talk to these people? Because it's very difficult to put these fairy tales into the newspaper. So you develop some skills. So you don't go into discussion, as you would not probably do with somebody who believes in corona complot theories. But I would pose other questions. So if your country is so mighty and it's so great, then why are you living in such poor circumstances? And that would bring about a discussion, because it touches upon their own direct living space.
And if we're talking about tactics from the government, did you also experience this in your daily work as a journalist in Moscow?
Yeah, definitely. I think the most urgent and most dangerous development that we saw as journalists was the censorship. So the military censorship that was passed directly after the invasion. But also, of course, I mean, the disinformation, you live in a disinformation bubble. So here, I mean, it's very difficult to understand, I think. But of course, I mean, the propaganda is everywhere, and it's so strong that it's very difficult to work. I think
you mean it's everywhere, like on the TV, on people?
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
On the streets, you know, you have the war propaganda. Of course, we had the Z and the V, these mysterious signs of war that actually didn't make it to be like real symbols of war, because people sense it's a weird sign. It's not in Cyrillic, but no, I mean, yeah, it's everywhere. The war is everywhere, so it's very difficult for people to have another narrative, and I think that's for us the most important thing to understand. And as Pekka said, the reason that it's so effective, there is no other counter narrative. So if you kick out all the journalists, if you close all the media, if you allow one narrative and people are put in jail for 25 years because they use the word war, I mean, maybe it was 10 years or 5 years, but still it's a very long time, you kill free speech. And if you kill free speech, then it's the end of the free world, I would say. I mean, as a journalist, I would say that, obviously.
And you also visited the Wagner group, the paramilitary group. Do they also make use of these hybrid tactics? What did you
Definitely,
see?
Because of course we know Wagner as a paramilitary company that was deployed in Ukraine to do like actual warfare. Mm-hmm. But what is maybe a little bit less known about the former chief of Wagner, Mr. Yevgeny Prigozhin, who was shot down last year and is dead now, is that he ran a huge disinformation operation. So first it started with a troll factory. Probably a lot of people heard about it, the IRA in St. Petersburg. But he expanded this, and during the war he propelled a lot of different platforms that were all part of his big imperium, which was called Concord Group. And it was always, you know, it was producing disinformation on a turbo scale. So at some point he opened a big office, I would say, an office in St. Petersburg. There was a big launch. It was like the flagship store of Wagner, which already, of course, it's crazy if you think about what the war crimes that Wagner soldiers and the criminals that they took from jails did in Ukraine. So I just decided to go there, and maybe for the Dutch audience, if people saw there's a horror film, it's a horror movie, it was in the 80s, The Lift. It's about a lift that actually functions by itself. I don't know if you ever heard about it. Probably not. Anyway, the most scary thing, moment in this film is when the lift stops and the guy who's trying to fix it, he opens the little box and it's empty. And this was the exact experience that I had when I came into this big Wagner flagship store office thing. It was empty. And then there was one woman, and she led me around. I wrote an article about it for NRC, and she showed me a room where some young people were just working behind computers, and they showed me this information they were producing, and they were so proud. They said, "This is for our country. This is for our patriotic state. It's for Putin." They were so proud of what they were doing, and I think that was one of the most scary and the most shocking moments I had in all my time in Russia. Mm-hmm. This moment when I entered this empty Wagner space. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you want to react?
It just sounds absurd, but completely believable. And I mean, sounds like Russia.
Yeah, it is. And luckily, that's what I have to add. There are also a very big number of people in Russia that are thinking straight, that are trying to find the correct information, that are using VPN to go around the blockades of social media and of independent media. And there are many, many people who still find their ways not to walk into this, black tunnel of disinformation. And those are the people that we should be talking to.
We also had, at the beginning of this evening, 2 presentations on how Russian tactics affect the Netherlands. You also saw how Russia changed after the second invasion of Ukraine. How do you think Russia views the Netherlands? Like, are we important?
Well, that's a good question. Yes, I think we are important. It comes in waves, probably. When MH17 was downed, obviously, we were of great interest to the Russians, and as Pekka greatly showed in his presentation, the Russians are first. They will have the story first, and it's true. And it is put in people's minds. Of course, as Mr. Reesink also explained, we have a lot of very important institutions in the Netherlands, the ICG, the OPCW, that are of great interest to Russian hybrid warfare, Russian secret operations, and also disinformation. And yeah, I mean, the coalition in Ukraine, or the European coalition that's providing Ukraine with weapons, political coalition, the Netherlands has a very important role. And I would sense that also in Russia, being in Russia. People know about the Netherlands always. I mean, not only because of Peter the Great, but exactly because of all these incidents that they had and they have seen where it comes to disinformation and enemies in Europe. And the Netherlands is definitely one of them, and it's high on the list.
In 2022, the German and French branch of the Kremlin-based outlet Russia Today shut its doors in Germany and France because of EU sanctions. What do you think of this?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't think it was the right solution to actually close them in Europe. I mean, I don't believe in censorship. I believe in resilience in society and this kind of informing of people about these platforms rather than closing them outright. I mean, it's basically a propaganda weapon that's given to the Russians, that they can say, okay, they are censoring our independent media and this kind of stuff. So, but I mean, it didn't really affect that much because, as I said, most of the information operations are still happening on social media and on fake news websites. I'm sorry if I don't. It's the andere Kraut. Yeah. So this kind of websites are used to spread the narratives more than, because what the Russian system also does is that it tells you not to trust the mainstream media. because you have any big paper in any country, they say that you cannot trust them. You have to trust this alternative media that will tell you the truth, and then it's something like Natural News or Andere Krat or whatever is Bonanza Media. It doesn't really matter what mainstream media or big media house is being censored, because they'll always provide an alternative version that will try to set the agenda, as I said. So,
what do you think about this closings of Russia Today?
Well, it was very controversial, and I think there's. I was fascinated or interested by this controversy. I think it's important not to forget about this episode, because it just happened after the Russian invasion in Ukraine. It was so the physical offices of RT and Sputnik closed in Paris, in Berlin, and there was a lot of talk about it, because a lot of people said. So we, as the West, we're also always championing freedom of speech, and now we're closing down Russian media. And then you get into this gray zone, whether it is a media company or it's a propaganda and disinformation tool. We thought, okay, well, I think that's what happened. I mean, those offices were closed, but those websites still function. And of course, you cannot access them directly. You need a VPN. But as Pekka also showed in his presentation, they are much more focused now on Francophone Africa, on other language spaces in the world, where this is very effective. And it's still going on. I mean, when I spend a lot of time in France, my husband is French, and I hear a lot of people saying to me that they are watching RT online. Looking at the articles, watching some of the news with VPN, and they're parroting exactly what's happening there. So with closing the physical offices down, you're not closing down the information space.
And also, listening to your presentation, would you say it's more about building trust than closing down or punish platforms which publish?
Yeah, and I mean, politicians kind of dislike when I say that that's the solution, because it takes time, it takes a lot of money, it takes time, and it takes effort to build this system of resilience, integrated into your education system, and create this society where people have the skill set of critical thinking and media literacy. It takes time. It's not like a magical solution that just censorship is easy, because you can just close websites. And but doing this kind of long-term commitment, it's a big effort. So.
Yes, because also if I look at the Netherlands, you were just talking about Finland with a high average of trust, but in the Netherlands, I think at the end of 2023, there was a new report saying that Dutch citizens have a 50% trust in their government. Like if they rate their life on wealthiness, they say it's sufficient, but in government trusts, it's like 50% says, no, I don't trust the government.
I mean, yeah, for that is create a better society and just integrate this stuff into your curriculum. That's my advice. I don't know if it's
for everyone here.
It's not easy, but it's where you should start, because I still consider Finland to be one of the most resilient countries when it comes to the Kremlin bullshit.
Eva, last question for you. We heard also from Mr. Racing about the sanctions on Russia. What do average Russians notice from this? I read different stuff about economy going good, not going bad. Some people, how would you describe?
The economy is doing very well, actually, because Putin was very successful building a war economy over the past 2 years, where the West and European countries are still fuzzing about, how much money and can we actually deliver weapons to Ukraine. Putin is very effective, and then again, I mean, it's a totalitarian system, so he doesn't have the checks and balances. He doesn't have to, go through parliament. He doesn't have to do all of of that. It's very fast and easy. So Russians, thanks to parallel import, thanks to dodging the sanctions through other countries, and thanks to many allies that Russia has in the world, helping, either for ideological reasons or for mostly financial reasons, helping Russia to duck the sanctions and to import iPhones and computers and Gucci and socks. I don't know, anything. I mean, you can get anything. And also with this comes washing machines, all kinds of dual use products. Which contain chips, for instance, that can be used in the military industry, which is happening on a vast scale, also from Taiwan, from China, from many countries. So for the Russians, no, there's no big impact for now. This is also what has been used by Putin during the elections the past week in Russia, of course, completely flawed and fake and bullshit elections. But that is what he's telling the people. Actually, this war is making your life better. This war has increased many salaries, especially in the military industry. People in many occasions got a better life. And the story of Putin, this is thanks to the war, and it's thanks to our united effort against the enemy, which is Europe, NATO, the West, and of course, first and foremost, America.
Thank you.
So, yeah, sorry, not a very happy story. No. But it's real, and I think it's very important that we wake up, as Mr. Reising said, because we really have to get going where it comes to countering all these different initiatives of hybrid warfare. It's super urgent.
We're going to discuss the more concrete things we can do with our next speaker. I want to thank you and hope to read a lot of your beautiful stories. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'd like to invite Laurens Groeneveld to the table. A journalist with a broad experience in the field of international politics, and within the investigative desk he specializes in stories about Russia, China and defense. And as a freelancer you also made a documentary, Breaking the Narrative, about how Finland deals with military threats and disinformation from Russia. Welcome.
Hi.
How did you listen to the evening so far? Heard anything new? Something striking?
Well, I'm one of the organizers, so I know it's something I follow for a while. But I guess everyone is saying it's about awareness and about understanding the situation. Also, when it comes to the Netherlands, on what position do we take in this whole spectrum? And the Netherlands is also an interesting target for Russia because we do have a big military role to play. Not just for the aid we give to Ukraine, but it also is because of our geographical position. So we hear more and more serious warnings coming from generals all over Europe that there is a possibility that in the next 5, maybe 10 years, there's a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia. And the Netherlands is one of the main places where American soldiers, American food supply, American tanks will arrive. They arrive in Rotterdam, they arrive in Vlissingen, and in the Eemshaven in the north of the Netherlands. And those are targets that Russia has marked very clearly on the map. One of the main commando centers of NATO is in the Netherlands for Western Europe. All those places are marked and will be a first target when it comes to an actual conflict. Exactly the places where the Marine and the Coast Guard said we need actually more equipment to research and protect. Yeah. And you also did research on Russian tactics, specifically on the Netherlands. Can you elaborate a bit on maybe also the influence on Dutch politics? Yeah, the Netherlands is interesting because it's we don't have the very big examples like in France, where you know that the party of Marine Le Pen, Rassemblement National, the former Front National, they received 2 big loans from Russia. Like that is documented in papers. But in the Netherlands, we have a few parties. obviously Forum for Democracy from Thierry Baudet and the PVV, which walk a bit of a thin line because we don't have the ticket, so to say, of the money, but we see them acting very suspicious. And when you look, for example, at the PVV, now the biggest party, we see that publicly in statements, Geert Wilders is trying to tone down his appreciation for Putin and his admiration for the system that they have in Russia, and saying that he supports Ukraine. He talked with the Ukrainian ambassador, but at the same time, when you look at their voting record, even this week, when in Parliament there was a vote on the treaty between the Netherlands and Ukraine for the next decade to give security assistance, it was the PVV that voted against it. We saw a few weeks ago during a defense debate that there was a member of the PVV that said publicly that the support for Ukraine given by the Netherlands is agitation for Russia. So you see a very big discrepancy between what they're saying in the parliament and what they're saying in front of the camera. And
but of course, saying you don't want to support Ukraine doesn't mean maybe immediately that you have ties with the Kremlin or that you receive money.
Specifically, when you talk about Wilders, this has been ongoing for more than a decade. And it goes back to 2013, 2014, when he's very critical of Ukraine. It goes into that he's one of the main figures that built this far-right network of parties that probably is going to have a big victory in the next European elections. It goes to 2016 when he meets these parties in a meeting in Milan, where there are Russian operatives present, Alexander Dugin, the famous Russian thinker, and Malofeev, which is an oligarch which is known for financing the effort to take over Crimea in 2014, and known for financing parties like La Lega. And he says, I found an email from this, and in the email it states that he doesn't want to see them in public, because he knows that if he's going to be photographed with them, it's evidence that he knows that there's Russian influence in his network. But he doesn't care that there's Russian influence, he cares that it's not on the picture. So already years ago, there are all these suspicious activities around this party. And the problem is that you cannot show it 100% because, again, you don't have receipts or anything. But especially in the time the time that we are in now, when you have a war that is directly affecting our livelihood as the Netherlands, taking certain positions towards Russia is just suspicious. And unless you have a proper explanation, more than you want to fight Russophobia or something, they should be questioned very seriously, I think.
And what's happening in our parliament at the moment, like to counter these things? In terms of maybe laws or...
So there's one fundamental problem, that is the investigation of the money that went into Dutch politics over the last decades. Since 2023, there's a new legislation that prevents foreign money coming into Dutch politics. But ministers and members in parliament have said to me, we cannot know for certain what money has been coming in over the last decade. And there's an attempt to start investigating that. They will soon, there's a new law going to the Raad van State. I don't know what the English translation will be. And that legislation is going to help set up a unit that's going to investigate the money that went into Dutch politics over the last decade. But it's going to take a lot of years before this unit is fully up and running and before it's going to publish its first research.
Good starting point, or not enough?
Yeah, I mean, we have to remember that we have been at war with Russia for 10 years, plus 10 years. The information war has been ongoing.
We as Finland or Europe?
Europe, the United States. I would say the Western democracies have been at war with Russia for a long time in this information war. And we are not prepared, and we are still not doing enough. We are, as was said before, we need to wake up. We need to do something that will help us counter these Russian strategies. And in social media space, there's actually a good movement called NAFO that it has been very effective. And it's actually the Ukrainians that told people that the Russian narrative should be ridiculed because they are ridiculous and they should be called out. And how we can fight the high volume of Russian disinformation online is with high volume. And this movement called, a social media movement called NAFO, has been extremely effective at it. So the civil society is playing a big role in all this also. It's not always policymakers and legislation that is required, it's also civil society that can do a lot of stuff. The Balie here is a good example of that, so like increasing awareness of these operations and so on.
I also read in this report from Jakob, what's his last name? Kalinski, who was a guest here in the Balie last year, and he published a report for Hybrid COC, and he also, he mentioned also cherish civil society, but also use humor. Content generating amusement is used very deliberately by Ukrainians. Humor helps to reach larger audiences, and humorous content goes viral more often.
Yeah, that's basically NAFO for you. I mean, it's a really big movement, and it focuses on ridiculing and humor and memes and all this. So you shouldn't.
You're saying we could also create this here and
some kind of movement. Yeah, I mean, it's civil society. They can do wonders. You don't even really need any kind of funding to be active. Anybody can be an activist that is, for example, pro-Ukraine.
And unfortunately, Frans Timmermans is not here, but if he would be here, would there be one concrete thing you would advise him or, give to him as please start with this? Or
I think I already said it many times. It's the education. That's basically where you have to focus.
I want to look in the audience if there's anyone with a question for our guests, and we come to you with a mic. I see. Oh, yeah. And please, one question for one speaker.
Hi, good evening. Thanks all for presentations and sharing your experiences, really valuable. I'm wondering, I think one question is to Pekka and one question to either Lawrence or Eva, who would like to take upon. Pekka, what do you think about disinformation maybe becoming criminalized at some point, and whether it could be considered as a part of a war crimes that Russia has committed in Ukraine?
I feel like it's a slippery slope. I mean, this kind of legislation will stay with us in the future also, and it could be weaponized by, I don't know, figures who don't have the best intentions, let's put it like that. So, for example, if you look at Hungary as an example, how quickly can a democracy deteriorate into an authoritarian regime? So this kind of legislation could probably be weaponized, so I don't think it's a good idea. I still go with the education.
Someone else? Oh, here in the front. Oh, no, sorry, there. Sorry, missed you. Yeah.
I was wondering, because it seems like this is something new, but I remember the Cold War during the Soviet Union times. At that time, the Soviet Union was also doing hybrid warfare. Can we take up the scenarios that we have very successful during the Cold War to counter Soviet Union's hybrid warfare, to take these scenarios out of the cupboard and to apply them to Russia? That's the first thing. And one more thing to this is, can we send a very clear message to Russia in a strategic communication to Russia? And what I mean by that is perhaps using something like Stuxnet, will be applied to Iran, to do something like this to Russia, so that they know that we are really meaning something, and they know that they shouldn't do this anymore to us.
I think Eva really would like to answer this one.
Wait, I don't. Maybe you should come here because I don't have another mic. If you want to.
No, I was just tempted to say something about your very correct comparison to the Soviet Union, but I would like to note that the problem in the Soviet Union and in the Cold War was that the country was completely cut off from the outer world. Luckily, we now have We do have the internet, which is really nice, but we also had free travel. We still value that very much in the European Union. But if you close and completely isolate Russia, as we are doing, and Russia is isolating itself, I don't think we are getting on the right path. I think we should actually try to identify those voices that are still very, very present in Russia, the opposition, the people that do not agree. And we have seen over the past elections and also during the the burial of Navalny, that there are many people, and we should be talking to those people. And we should try to build those ties with those people and those organizations that are still trying to work from inside Russia. So I would not be for isolation or, closing it off as happened in the Soviet Union, but actually to identify those people that we should be talking to. Sorry.
And to pick up on your question about Stuxnet, I think if you delve into the media reporting about the activities of the Dutch intelligence services, I think you can see that over the last years they have actually been very effective in getting into the nerves of the Russian hackers as well, because we saw that it was the Dutch Secret Service that was looking onto the Russian hackers that were hacking the server of the Clinton campaign during the elections in 2016. And I think when it comes to that topic, but I don't know if Mr. Racing would like to add something to that. He mentioned that if necessary to defend ourselves, we are also willing to go on the offensive. And I do think that the Netherlands is doing much more than we know on this field.
Maybe it's coming a mic.
Just a very quick remark then. You're right. We do a little bit more, but if you look at it's not Russia related, but if you look at the 40Gate, which was presented a few weeks ago with regard to China, and China hacked a software system which was used in Netherlands Defense Department as well. It's the way they do it, but it's the way we sometimes do it as well. But it's always for the cause of, in the end, being in the defense. So it's not by its origin meant as an offensive operation.
Okay. I think there was a question here in the back.
Oh, thank you. I have a question for Mr. Racing as well. Roughly spoken, we divided the Russia's hybrid war tonight in massive disinformation campaigns and attacks on critical infrastructure. What is worrying you the most and why?
Well, I guess what worries me the most is disinformation, I would say. Because it's, like Pekka said as well, it's enormous. It's the scale which scares me. And you're always, from the first moment on, you're in the defense. You always have to respond. So for them it's easy, and for us it's difficult.
Yes. Can you raise your hands, because then I can see. Okay, 3 more.
Thank you. Peter Buys from Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War, Nobel Peace Prize 85. Nuclear weapons are not mentioned yet, are one of the biggest threats of the current situation. From the first day on of the war, Putin was already threatening the West with his nuclear weapons. Did it play any role in Russian hybrid war, nuclear weapons, or are they too dangerous for that?
And to who do you ask the question?
Sorry, Pekka.
On our website, vatniksub.com, you can find, we've listed all nuclear threats that any Russian official has made, and it's a long list. And it's always a red line, and I think all of these red lines have been crossed at some point. So, I mean, they haven't used them at this point, but I mean, you never know. It's always a weapon that they can use, but should we allow it to be used as a kind of a blackmailing device? Because then Pakistan can do it, India, and like we have these other nuclear countries that can, North Korea, like, okay, this is actually a viable strategy that we can utilize in geopolitics. We can just blackmail with nuclear weapons. So I wouldn't give too much weight on these so-called red lines that the Russian or the Kremlin has been giving with the nuclear threats, but that's just me. I'm not an expert.
Also wants to react.
A quick addition, Pekka. I think you're right, and I think Russia uses the nuclear thing as a sort of part of of their hybrid warfare. Nuclear strategy in the Soviet Union or in Russia, as it is right now, has a public part, or sort of open part, or transparent part, and has a secret part. And the transparent part is basically used for communication and for disinformation. So it's the sole reason to keep the initiative at Russia's side. So it's a tool for them as well.
The secret part of the point.
Yeah, I don't know anything about the secret portion. No.
Yes, question in the back. Je kan hem even houden hoor, voor als er nog één voor jou komt.
That it's Russia's ambition to keep Ukraine a buffer state, a neutral state. I personally, I find it hard to believe, as Russia has invested since 2008 about closely 1,000 billion euros in its army. It has used propaganda since 2016. It has spread awful lies, and in my eyes, it has only done that to serve imperial goals. It never has done that to keep Ukraine as a neutral buffer state, and you know, like to keep it in between the West. And I'd like to point to the example of Belarus, which is part of the Eurasian Union, which is currently being integrated within Russia. And if you look at history, you can see that Russia has tried the same with Ukraine several times. So does Mr. Racing believe that actually a buffer state for Ukraine is an end goal for Russia?
Thanks for the statement. Is there also a question? Maybe the last question for one of our speakers?
Yeah. Yeah, whether Ukraine as a buffer state will be an end game for Russian Federation. To be honest, I don't know. If you look at the grand strategy which was laid out by Putin from 2008 or so, that can be different. So you could be right. But let me put it this way then. I think for the shorter term, and it's a very, well, it's very hypothetical. But for the shorter term, I would say that they will see Ukraine as a buffer state, as a neutral buffer state. And for the longer term, you might be right.
Last word to Eva.
Yeah, from my experience in Russia, I would like to comment or react and say that the Russian propaganda and the Russian government are definitely at war with Europe, with NATO. That's what their people are being told all the time. That's what people tell you. They believe, not all of them, but many believe that in Ukraine, NATO soldiers are thousands or 100,000s. I mean, people are inventing numbers. This is very serious for them. They feel threatened. They feel attacked. I was in Siberia, like 9,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. People feel that they have to protect their country. That's why they go to fight in Ukraine for a lot of money, but they go. And if you ask this question, I think it's very important that the theory, it's not even a theory, it's a plan that's being discussed very openly in Russian government, but also in Russian propaganda, is division of Ukraine. So we take Donbass, we already have Crimea, we take some other parts, then we'll give a little bit to Poland, and then the rest can maybe around Kiev can be an independent little state with no threat whatsoever. So the Russians are already there, and I think it's good that you pointed that out. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. We have to round off, but don't worry, we have a third round at the bar, so the discussion can continue there. Last thing I wanted to point out is that we have a special exhibition opening today at the Balie, and we have several works on display from the Russian artist and political prisoner Pavel Krusevich. So please take a look at this exhibition before leaving. And I want to thank you for your attention, and also I want to thank the speakers. Please give them a last round of applause and a very good evening.